when you look back in history at some of the world's great leaders, one of the things you notice is that they often make some fairly big demands on their followers. So you had Winston Churchill, the great wartime leader. He told the British people that he had nothing to offer them but blood, sweat and tears. And there was the famous Italian freedom fighter Garibaldi, who said to his followers he only could offer hunger and death to those who joined him in the fight to free Italy. And in our gospel reading from Luke this morning, Jesus makes a similar kind of offer. He says to would-be followers, "Take up your cross and follow me." And of course, the cross is associated with pain and with suffering. It's a difficult message that Jesus gives to the crowd that's gathered around him. And he's not being overly or unnecessarily dramatic either. Here's a bit of a roll call of what happened to Jesus' original group of followers. So Andrew died on a cross. Simon was crucified. Bartholomew was flayed alive. James the son of Zebedee, we've got kids around, so I should be careful what I say, but wasn't good for him either. James the son of Alphaeus was beaten to death. Thomas was run through with a lance. Matthias was stoned. Matthew was slain by the sword. Peter was crucified upside down. Thaddeus was shot to death with arrows. Philip met a bad ending. Only John actually made it through alive, and he ended up being stranded on a small island. The people visiting this morning are probably thinking, gee, you're not doing a very good job of selling this whole following Jesus thing to us. But Jesus is making the point that there is a cost to following him. He's telling us that following him, Christianity, following Jesus, is not just a little value add to your life, something you put on in the corner that maybe might make things a bit better, might make you sleep better at night. No, he's saying there is a cost to following me. It's a serious thing. We're being reminded in our gospel reading this morning that following Jesus shakes the very foundations of our lives. It changes our priorities. It changes the way we live. And it could potentially, those changes could put us at odds with our family, with our friends, maybe with the people we work with. So let's just unpack this reading a little bit. As we've just heard, there's a large crowd following Jesus, and they would be following him for different reasons. There would be lots of different mixed reasons for people being there to hear Jesus. Some would be thinking, hey, we heard this guy's a bit of a miracle worker. He fed a crowd of 5,000 people. Maybe if we follow him, we'll get a feed too. Some were thinking, maybe we'll see a miracle. Some would have been thinking, this guy's a really interesting teacher, let's go hear what he's got to say. Some would have just been attracted because a crowd draws a crowd. You know, when you see something going on, what's happening over there? You go to the crowd. Some, no doubt, would have been genuinely wanting to follow Jesus. And so with all these people around, with all these mixed reasons for being there, Jesus turns and decides to make the point that following me is a costly exercise. And he makes clear what true commitment involves. And that's what I wanted to look at this morning. What are the markers of true commitment to Jesus? And I was reflecting on these during the week after reading the thoughts of a guy by the name of Brett Blair. So the first thing that Jesus is saying in this passage is that to be truly committed to following him, we need to establish our priorities. It's too easy, at least I think it is, to let less important things in life take over from the important and crowd them out. And it happens in all sorts of ways, doesn't it? We can let hobbies maybe get in the way of time with our kids or grandkids. We can let watching TV maybe get in the way of sitting around the table and enjoying a meal with our families. We can prioritise work over spending time with our partner. There's lots of things we do in life where we push important things to the side for the sake of less important things. And when it comes to following Jesus, I find it's really easy to just push him to the side as well and go, well, I'll just I'll just put that over there because I've got all these other things that I want to do and other things that are going to take my time. And yet Jesus demands more. He says, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. It's a really strong call to get our priorities right. This is probably a good time to comment on the bit where Jesus talks about hating your family. Where does he say? Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. What's going on there? What does that mean? That doesn't seem like the kind of thing that Jesus would say. So I just want to make a brief comment on that. It's important not to get sidetracked by that, by the word hate, because in Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke, hate is not so much a feeling word, it's primarily a priority word. So when we hear it, we think of a feeling, but at the time, in the Aramaic language, hate is a priority word. So Jesus is making the point that he needs to be at the top of our priority list. And when Jesus is at the top of our priority list, that will allow other things to fall into their rightful place. So we shouldn't get sidetracked by the word hate and go, Jesus is asking us to be mean to and to dislike our family and our friends. No, he's not saying that at all. That would be a contradiction to his other teachings. What he's saying is, make sure that I am the most important thing in your life, and then those other things will fall into their rightful place. If I'm the number one priority, you'll be a better child to your parents. If I'm the number one priority, you'll be a better parent to your children. You'll be a better friend, all those kinds of things. So it's important not to get confused by the wording there. But what this is a clear call to assess where we are in terms of our commitment to Jesus. Does our commitment to Jesus shape us, shape the way we live, the way we interact with the world around us, or is it just a peripheral thing? That's the call, to get our priorities right. The second thing we need to do when it comes to following Jesus according to our reading is to count the cost. To count the cost. So what does that mean? Well, basically, it means to go into following Jesus with our eyes wide open. Make a sober assessment whether following Jesus is actually something we want to do or not. Now, I'm not a builder. I'm hopeless with my hands. I can't do anything. But I understand enough to know that if I was going to undertake a building project, I would count the cost first. Can I afford what's going to happen there? Can I make that commitment knowing how much it's going to cost? Is this something I can commit to or not? And again, there are lots of people in the crowd just along for the ride, and so Jesus wants to make it clear. Hey, count the cost. Know what you're getting yourself into. And at this point in his story, Jesus is not on the way to building an empire. Lots of people following Jesus were hoping that God's Messiah would come and would kick the ruling Roman occupiers out of their country. So they were thinking, yeah, Jesus is going to be this new king. He's going to kick the Romans out. He's going to build an empire and we're going to be at the top. But Jesus is actually on his way to the cross. He's not building the kind of empire that they think. He's on his way to the cross. And here's the really important thing about following Jesus. When it comes to following Jesus, the way up is down. I'll say that again. When it comes to following Jesus, the way up is down. And what I mean by that is that it means that we need to be generous, not stingy. Sometimes the world says, look after yourself, don't worry about other people. But Jesus says, no, be generous. The way up is down. Jesus says, be welcoming. Welcome everyone. Don't just welcome the people who you think are okay or you think are respectable enough or who are like you. Don't just love people who will love you back, but love even your enemies. Don't just hang out with respectable people. Go to the margins. The way up is down. Following Jesus, the kingdom of God has often been described as an upside-down kingdom. His values, his priorities, his way of operating are totally different to the world around us. And as challenging as that can seem, the flip side to that is it's actually the way to life. When we live that way, it brings new life to us and new life to the people around us. The kingdom of God has been described as an upside-down kingdom, and I think that's accurate. And to live in an upside-down way can be tough, but when we do it, we actually find life. We find love. We find life. When we lose our lives for the sake of God's kingdom, that's how we find them. The final cost that we need to be willing to pay, final thing we need to do is to be willing to pay the price. Jesus says we need to be willing to pay the price. And I think this is where this teaching gets really tough, as if it wasn't tough enough already. But Jesus says, any one of you who is not willing to give up everything cannot be my disciple. So the big question is, what does it look like to give up everything? Well, I think it means taking the call to make Jesus the King or the Lord of our lives seriously. It means to bring everything under the control, under the lordship of Jesus, to make sure that our values and our priorities are the same as his. We talk about the kingdom of God, living according to the kingdom of God. And kingdom isn't really a word that we use much these days. We don't talk about kingdoms. But basically a kingdom is as it sounds. It's the king's domain. The king's domain, the place where the king's values and attitudes hold sway. And so we're being asked to live in the kingdom of God, to live with the priorities, the values and the attitudes of Jesus. And so I think the big challenge for us this morning is, how are we going with that? How are you going with that? Me, if I'm honest, probably not great. I think I'm okay in some areas, but in other areas, I think my priorities are all wrong. And so this passage really challenges me. There are areas where I miss the mark, where I don't live the way God calls me to live, and it's not good for me, and it's not good for the people around me. And so I wonder this morning if maybe God's Spirit is giving you a bit of a nudge. Are you being convicted in an area of life that needs to be brought under the lordship, under the kingship of Jesus? As we read in the Bible, we see in the Old Testament, Moses gave up Pharaoh's court. He gave up that place of prestige and honour. Peter, one of Jesus' early disciples, gave up the family fishing business to follow Jesus. Matthew, another follower of Jesus, gave up a lucrative job as a tax collector. And Paul, well, he gave up a well-respected position as a Pharisee where everyone looked up to him and thought he was great. He gave that up. I wonder what you might need to hand over. I wonder what I might need to hand over afresh to God for a bit of reshaping in terms of its priority. And I wonder if we're prepared to trust the fact that if we do that, it will actually be the best thing for us. Jesus said, if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. And what he's saying there is, if you live the kind of life I call you to live, not the life the world says you should live, if you live the kind of life I call you to live, then trust me, you will find life and life to the full, beginning now and stretching into eternity. We see glimpses of it now. We don't get the whole thing, but the promise is that we will. I wonder what God is calling you to reshape. Just going to leave a moment's silence now for us to hear what God might be saying to us through what we've heard this morning, and then I'll pray. So just a little bit of quiet.